All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome so much. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Lindsay. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and she, her, hers. And on behalf of University City Public Library, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight for our second presentation in the series we're calling Missouri 1821 to 2221, which looks at the past, present, and future of environmental justice in Missouri, St. Louis, all of the region. So I would like to take this time to acknowledge that the library occupies the land of the Kickapoo, Osage, Kaskaskia, Miami, Ogafa, and Osheti Shakovan nations. This program series is made possible by the Missouri Bicentennial Grant, which is an IMLS LSTA grant administered by the state of Missouri State Library. We are live streaming this presentation section to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. So everyone is in the Zoom meeting of this program. If you could just keep your microphones muted until the first part of the presentation is over. We'll cut the live stream after that so that we can have a more personal discussion, and then we'll end with our calls to action. If you do have any questions during the program, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And if you would like to join the discussion, if you are watching live on our Facebook and YouTube channels, go ahead and email us at reference@ucitylibrary.org to receive the Zoom invitation. So, tonight, we are looking at how environmental justice plays out in our everyday lives here in Missouri. Our fabulous host for this entire series is Leah Clyburn. Leah is a senior training representative with the Sierra Club and is an organizer for the Beyond Cool campaign here in the region. You can also find her work as the co-author to the Environmental Racism in St. Louis report, which came out in 2019. You can find that at environmentalracismstl.com. So we have three fabulous guests tonight to talk about the daily environmental impacts in our communities. First is Patricia Schuba. Patricia lives in Labadie, Missouri, 4 miles from the largest coal-fired power plant in the state and the last large plant in the United States without modern pollution controls. She is in the 4th generation of her family to live in Labadie. Labadie is in Franklin County here in Missouri and is a semi-rural area with a mix of income levels and impacts from pollution and poor governance. She has led the Labadie Environmental Organization, also you'll hear called LEO, since 2012. LEO is an all-volunteer community organization advocating for the pollution cleanup of coal ash, water contamination, and air pollution from coal-generated power. Next up, we'll have Nancy Moore. Nancy has a Master's of Science in Nursing and is a women's healthcare nurse practitioner and is a doctoral student as well. So you can find Nancy at the OBGYN clinic at Barnes Jewish Hospital, where she focuses on routine OB prenatal care, group prenatal care, family planning, and gynecological conditions. Last but not least, we have Beth Gutzler. Beth has an MBA and has been the lead environmental justice organizer with Metropolitan Congregations United, also MCU, since early 2020. And while working with MCU, she realized that she was an impacted person and met a lot of impacted people over the last 16 years in St. Louis. She has experience with restorative practices after founding the Social Action and Virtue Education Foundation in 2016. She enjoys working at MCU as congregations realize they can lead the work of care for creation. So thanks again for joining us tonight. If you can all keep your microphones muted if you're not going to be presenting, and then we'd like to go ahead and hear some introductions from our guests. And then Leah, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that energized introduction. And thank you all for joining us this evening. So for all of our speakers, you guys go ahead and come off um, come on to video, actually come on to video for us. And if you could, I'll start with Patricia Shuba. Just give a little shout out and let everyone see your face.
Good evening, everybody. I'm grateful to be here with you tonight and share my perspective as a person living in a community impacted by pollution.
Thank you so much. And then next again, we have Beth. Beth, will you shine a little light to everyone?
Well, thank you. My name is Beth Betzler, she, her pronouns, and I'm again from MCU, which is mostly metropolitan, but I always feel like we're expanding in our work of organizing. And I just think EJ is important to me, like I said in my bio, because I've witnessed times where it feel like people intentionally chose to harm the environment or look the other way or turn their eyes. And that's why I am involved in the work.
Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, Nancy, shine a little something on for us, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy. My pronouns are she and her. And I am a nurse practitioner at Barnes OBGYN clinic. So when we think about the environment, it affects us all, whether or not we know it, we are affected by air pollution and things like that. So just how it affects our health is something that's become important to me over these last couple of years. And so that's why I'm here tonight.
And thank you all so much. These women are some impactful individuals in our community. Since the Environmental Racism Report, we've been gifted to really engage with community partners and leaders such as these to really give a deeper, more holistic vision around what is the impacts to the environmental injustice that Missourians all across are facing. And so last week, we had Tara from WashU, who really gave us a full in-depth breakdown of the Environmental Racism Report and all the studies that had shown throughout, lifting up the disparities of the effects of low income and Black children throughout St. Louis, who are impacted by upper respiratory issues, actually identified through the hospital itself and report upper respiratory concerns. We have, Lindsay, if you can share the document that I shared with you. I want to make sure that folks are very clear about what we're about to engross here about the various concepts that we're addressing. The document shared is a compile of all the studies related to Ameren and the health impacts due to pollution, as well as the environmental injustice. In this document, everyone will be able to find a link to the most current research that was done by Harvard and Stanford University, as well as Washington University around fine particulate matter. For those who don't understand, aren't really clear what fine particulate matter is, it's basically simple as the simplest form to express it. It is, a mixture of pollen, a mixture of CO2, a mixture of SO2. It's all the pollution particles together that we inhale. And the folks that are highly impacted by that are the people who live by highways or what is considered fenced areas. And that just so happens to be considered individuals who are considered low income and or Black, brown, or even immigrant community members in our state, in our country. Nationwide, it is found that Black and low income people face the highest risk for death from power plants and fine particle pollution, according to new research. The pollution likewise causes thousands of deaths across the state lines, right? There's no borders for wind, right? Wind blows west to east, at least here in Missouri. And like to even go further with that understanding, it was back that we were able to find, the Sierra Club was able to find that the Clean Air Task Force health impacts report found that Ameren has been violating the clean air guidelines. And so you will find more information there, where responsible for over 300 premature deaths and 130 heart attacks and 3,207 asthma attacks. So our health truly is endangered here and is definitely a concern and at risk. And it's going to take all of us to come together to work and not just find a solution, but fight for a solution. We also, in this document, highlight the St. Louis Equity Indicators Report, and that's from 2018. And so in that report, it really leans in on how Black children are 10 times more likely as white children to visit the ER room due to asthma-related complications. And so this list goes on and on and on, and how folks are constantly being impacted. And so who's in the middle, right? So in this conversation we're going to have tonight, I really want you to think about, where are you located? Some of us live in the middle of, in the county, if you will, or in Midtown of St. Louis. And that might be U City, that might be Webster Groves, Clayton. And so we might not necessarily identify ourselves as the direct impact, but if the wind blows from west to east, and if Franklin County is on one side and North City is on the other, is it possible that we too are being affected by this air, by this air pollution? And it's not just air that we're talking about either tonight. We're going to dive in a little bit more into what's going on with our groundwater levels, what's going on with the places we love to go and recreation. One of the things I love to talk about is how Missourians, we're swamp people, we're river people. We love going down by the river, and constantly that pastime is being challenged every year by water variants, by corporations paying to pollute. And it's time that we all come together and say no more, or else something as simple and as deeply loved and valued like the Katy Trail to the Missouri River is not going to be one that we will be able to explore much longer. And I know for me, growing up here in St. Louis, that definitely was a part of my childhood and school field trips. So without further ado, as I laid out where we are in St. Louis or in Missouri wide, I would like to ask our panelists, this first question is, what concerns you most about the current conditions of Missouri's coal position as we are in, especially as we're talking about closing down some of these coal plants, and some of these coal plants have these residuals of coal ash pits. And so can you shine a light on that and its impacts on communities? Patricia, could you start us off with that? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry. So I was going to say, both myself and my family and the community that I live in that started this nonprofit have a lot of concerns about the coal ash being left in pits near the river, near the Missouri River in Franklin County or Labadie, and of course at the other plants across the state, and the 4 here in the St. Louis region. And that's because coal ash has health, environmental, economic, and EJ concerns. The coal ash is what is left after the burning of coal for energy. It's laden with heavy metals and toxins that cause cancer, neurological conditions, heart conditions, and lung disease. So if you live near a coal-fired power plant, you have about a 1 in 50 chance of certain types of cancers in your lifetime. That's astonishing to me as someone coming from healthcare. The Labadie power plant alone is linked to hundreds of premature deaths per year and untold impacts to the quality of life. There was actually a report published a few years back in which the Labadie power plant was the cause of the majority of premature deaths in the nation around power plants. The utility has documented arsenic levels in the groundwater at Labadie as high as 6 times safe levels, and all 4 of its plants in the St. Louis region exceed safe water standards. And at the plant in Jefferson County, that level is well over 20 times what is safe, assuming there is a safe level of this carcinogen. And national experts don't agree on that. National surveys of the pollution around these sites, which is basically information that the utilities have reported to our National Environmental Protection Agency, show that the majority of these sites nationwide have exceedances of more than 3 toxic pollutants in the water below and around these pits, no matter how they are managed. And the 4 here in the St. Louis region, so there's 1 in Franklin County, 1 in South County, 1 in Festus area, and then 1 north across the river from Alton in North County. They all have multiple pollutants that have been detected by the utility themselves. It bears stating that the pollutants do not stay in place. They move with the groundwater toward private wells and out to the river and streams. Alarmingly, we have very little discussion or concern about the impacts to people, wildlife, and plants in our society. As a biologist, I'm concerned about all of those. It is as though we are closing our eyes because someone else benefits. The negative economic impacts of the plant were estimated almost a decade ago at approximately $750 million of additional healthcare burdens on the St. Louis region per year. To put that in perspective, Ameren paid $750 million to build the plant in Labadie. So we incur the burden of that year after year after year. And they were built in 1970 in Labadie. Coal ash is mixed with water, moved out into these pits close to the plant, where it is processed for movement into a landfill, possibly recycled, and most concerning, left in place to pollute the water. The pits at most plants are unlined, they're deep, they're steeping in water that ends up in the river and is used for drinking water, irrigation, growing food, and for wildlife. Amazingly, there's over 1,000 of these pits nationwide. We don't even know how many. The EPA does not know for sure. And they are predominantly located near our rivers and streams, given coal-fired power generation requires large volumes of water. 3/4 of the sites are more than 25 years old, and 10% are more than 50% old. And we know the older they are, the more they pollute. Gratefully, the EPA enacted a regulatory rule defining the impacts and proper handling of this waste, but it has been a struggle to fully enact the rule and protect communities and the environment, because it is written as a self-implementing rule, meaning the utilities monitor and manage themselves. In the US, our coal-fired utilities generate over 140 million tons of this toxic waste per year, and it is only second in volume to our household waste. The communities impacted by coal ash pollution and water pollution from coal-generated power have an underlying commonality, and that is that we don't have the resources to typically fight for environmental justice on our own. These communities in Missouri are both urban and rural, as Leah mentioned. mixed incomes, but likely higher percentage of those living in poverty. And in the Kansas City area and the Boot Hill of our state, these communities are communities of color. These are communities held down by economic and political systems. So you see, pollution takes a heavy toll on those least able to bear these impacts. Just solutions have to be both social and environmental. Communities like mine are fighting to educate ourselves and partner with others to build our power to right the wrongs, protect the future generations who will live on this land. From the pollution created by our century-old methods of producing energy, we are also looking to the future to ensure our communities are treated with respect and benefit from the clean energy transition and community development. Pollution holds communities down. We in the land we inhabit become what is thrown away in society for the betterment and benefit of a powerful few. Leo and communities like Labadie are demanding justice, equity, and opportunity for those people who have been both disenfranchised in the past and oppressed in the present. The future must be just and inclusive. It is my belief that to achieve a better future, we must unify to demand justice and not pick and choose communities that thrive and those that are left behind. It is no longer acceptable to just clean up the environment. We must reduce the burden of pollution on health, local economies, and address environmental justice issues. And I just want to say that this land in Labadie that Ameren built their power plant on in 1970 was procured by Europeans by the displacement of 3 indigenous tribes. And also alarming is that this area of the Metro St. Louis area, you saw the influx of Southern whites with slaves. And it just feels like it resonates to me that this is just a continuation of oppression and using other people for profit. And I look forward to hearing your questions and talking a little bit about some of these things across different interest groups.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I love it when Patricia starts talking because it's all the stuff, right? And like, I think what really resonates there is, so often our government talks about this, that they're protecting the salt of the earth people, right? And they refer to folks like out in Labadie, right? The farmer, lives in rural Missouri, who lives on this land. But it's what it sounds like you're saying to us is that people are not being heard. Is that right?
That's very true. It was shocking how we were treated by the utility and by our own government when we tried to stand up and speak. And it was the first time I ever saw just average people stand up and testify the way they did. I think the first hearing we had, about 60 people testify. We kept them there till like midnight. It was amazing to me. And I think we felt such joy that things would change, but they don't listen to you often, especially if there's a powerful entity that wants something and it's economic in nature. So we had to learn how to be strong. We had to learn how to educate each other and work together. We would have never gotten as far as we did if we didn't work together and work at several levels with different organizations too. But no, even farmers got up and testified at the risk of losing their right to farm in the Labadie floodplain, because some of them have to rent actually from the utility. So several of them lost their leases to do that.
Wow. That's alarming. And, Beth, like so your project that you're working on over at MCU really grapples with the relationship that communities who are being silenced, who are not being supported, and they are doing the research around the impacts of these coal fire plants, right? Like, so we heard about the groundwater level and how that's impacting folks who live in the area and they're being ignored. And, now, can you share a little bit more about like how folks in the churches in the surrounding urban areas are, grappling with addressing the pollution that they're facing due to the basically non-existent laws or the lax enforcement of said laws for folks around air pollution and pollution in general?
Yeah, thank you, Leah. So one of the things we do at MCU as organizers is we really try to listen and find impacted stories. And so some of these stories through canvases or our transformative conversations had led to conclusions that, yes, like we've already stated, there's health issues. But what comes also with these health issues? You're thinking about allergy and asthma, and until now, there was a gap for health insurance. So there's an economic impact as well. And then that goes beyond that because it pairs with other campaigns that we've worked on related to Break the School to Prison pipeline. If you have a child or even a parent that's out for asthma or allergy, there's multiple days of school missed for those concerns. And then possibly multiple work. And so not to mention shorter lifespans. So you have none of the benefits that other families that don't have these health concerns do in reference to generational growth, consistency of income, or just overall day-to-day interactions with your teacher in your school that can reduce incidences. And so these are just some of the issues that have come up around air pollution. But another thing that's come up is just the concept that with this particulate matter being so small, like when we go to the door and we ask somebody, do you have health concerns? No. How do you feel about the air quality? Well, my air looks fine. That was like literally the words that came out of the door I knocked on the other day. And it really struck home for me. And the idea that, it's true. These corporations, can change it to make it look like it's not pollution. Then you just change the way that comes out. And so it allows people to put a blind eye to what might actually be breathing. And it just, really calls for the opportunity for us to educate the community exactly how everyone's being impacted by this. But unfortunately, due to the things we've already mentioned, it is the Black and Brown and low income communities that seem to be hit the hardest.
Well, thank you for that. Can you educate us a little bit about the study that you all are doing in partnership with the churches in the area to address some of these, to not just address the air quality concern, but also educate community?
Yeah, so we really want to be able to create leaders within their own congregations. And so the community-based air quality monitoring program, it's a partnership through a grant right now, Washington University, Jay Turner's lab, the Nature Conservancy, as well as MCU, is coming together to put air quality monitors. These are EPA as well as other high-tech monitors from the WashU labs, and even some VOC work is going to be done to actually put it on the grounds of congregations. So there is a limited amount of monitoring. I don't know if that's been covered in previous conversations, but just to reiterate, there is a limited amount of monitoring and there's no way for you to find causality at all right now. And who controls that data? And so this community approach was proposed because this is frustrations that Jay Turner had actually found in Mongolia. This is frustrations that had been found by state-based work in Louisville. The fact that you do the monitoring, but nothing gets communicated. No one puts their call to action. And that's what we hope to do differently in the project that we're doing, that these committed congregations are going to not only educate themselves with what they find, but educate their own congregations in their communities.
Yeah, no, that's great. That is exactly the question, right? Where are these monitors that were being monitored, right? And Patricia, this a lot, an ongoing conversation at the Sierra Club. You are exactly correct, but it is a limited amount. Actually, the Ameren has been able to suggest to the regulatory agencies like the Missouri Department of Natural Resources to close down certain monitoring stations because they've reached a certain level, right? Or this plant is shutting down. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is letting those who are polluting tell you what should and should not be monitored. That's like asking a 3-year-old, did you do that? And they're standing there with the crayon in front of the wall being like, no, I didn't.
And Leah, can I say, I know because we did this work together about the Labadie plant, which is the largest emitter in the region. And that, like you said, blows predominantly towards St. Louis County, St. Louis City, that we argued for different placement of the monitors when they finally got them at Labadie because the federal government was asking them to document the risk to communities. Like we know what's coming out of the stacks because we know what they put in it.
Yeah.
And yet we have to find a place to monitor for, impacts to communities. And we let the utility do the studies and suggest where they should be.
Yes. Yep. Yes. In one of the reports that's provided in the link earlier, we talked about, it's listed from the Washington University study analysis along partnership with Stanford, that Ameren's coal plants were responsible for 58% of SO2 emissions back in 2016 and 48% in 2014. The total estimated mortality rate from the EGUs in Missouri in 2014 was 688. So our regulatory agencies know that this is a problem. This is not just a problem, right? Like people are dying. People from both rural Missouri and urban Missouri are dealing with impacts that are equaling to mortality, to their mortality. We are acknowledged that we know that this is the impact on people's everyday lives and the stress and their health. So Nancy, I want to lean in with you. What is the science? What is the health world now acknowledging in this shift that not just is our climate, but in the effects of pollution in general, especially from our air?
Yeah, to kind of just touch a little bit on what Patricia talked about. So air pollution in our world, in women's health, it's been shown to contribute to infants with low birth weights, also contributing to infants with congenital birth defects. So they're being exposed to lots of toxins that are being passed through the placenta through mom. And then we look at neighborhood environment. So you look down to the structure of the neighborhood. Where's mom living? So problems in the community of environment. So looking at, is there space for exercise? Are there public services available for moms? Even food, just having fresh availability for fresh produce. So when you look at all of that and you look at neighborhoods, most often it is that low income, underrepresented, underserved population that ends up suffering. And so in our world, then these infants end up suffering. And so as you go through, moms exposed to all these toxins, then that's where we have the babies that are exposed that lead to asthma, in young infants in childhood. So to me, it's all connecting and it all starts for all of us with our environment.
Yeah, so that's like, it's been so long, and I'm so grateful for Nancy, for you, and so many other health professionals who are really stepping up and joining us in this conversation all across the world, because this is something that actually was lifted up on MSNBC just the other day. Lindsay, if you can share that link as well. And they were talking about, women, we are the global majority, just in case people didn't know, we are it, right? But yet we are also ones in our world that are most reliant on natural resources. So from what Patricia was speaking on, from if our soil is not healthy, our food is not healthy. If our water is not healthy, our food is not healthy. If our air is not healthy, we are not healthy, right? And then when we lean in further on, and we're talking about, the impacts of just climate change in general, we are seeing that, like, who takes care of family most of the time, right? That responsibility, especially when you're talking about multi-generational, it's women, right? And so, not to leave men out, not doing that at all, but stop. This is studies have shown, right, that this responsibility falls at the feet of women. And so that stress of, like, say, like all these hurricanes, right, that we just had, it just seems like one is more strenuous than the other. So not having the basic needs and resources to house and provide and identify safety for your family is a huge stressor on the life of a woman, and families in general. But then when we go even further and look at smog and particulate matter and air pollution, yes, that conversation, that part about how the particulate matter can enter into the bloodstream and affect the placenta. That is something that has been ignored for so long, that fact. And then, we can't help but then to think about what's going on. There's pieces of this that also equal out into our water system. And the constant reminder that's happening here is the messaging, the people are being ignored. People in rural Missouri are being ignored. Back in 1985, and Lindsay, if you can share that article as well. Back in 1985, there was an action where the Rainbow Coalition, the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, and the Organization for Black, OBS. I don't want to mess them up, but OBS worked together back in 85 to fight to keep land to the farmers, because corporations were buying the land up from under them. Banks raised their mortgages and then deemed their land as not profitable, and then these corporations came in and basically stole land from right under them. And that was like the first real documented environmental justice event or issue where both rural and urban Missourians came together and said, this is not okay. And the reason for that was because neither side was being listened to. And yet, look, we're still hearing this conversation going on with the coal fire ash pits that's happening, and the folks in Labadie who are constantly being like, I am not crazy. We are not crazy, right? There is something wrong. You cannot cap it and forget it. It is not going to disappear, these toxins that you're putting in these holes in our ground. We are Missourians. We live in swampland. We are river people. That means our land is porous. So anything you put in a hole will find its way out in our water system. But what does that mean as it travels through? Right. And so as it travels, like water travels, air travels too. Right. And so we look at air monitoring over in our cities. and the lack thereof. And so now it's back on the backs of people like Beth's organization, leading with churches. And this is St. Louis, right? So you got churches every corner, right? There's not a corner. I'm in my parents' neighborhood right now, and there's 4 churches in like a 1 block radius, right? So there's churches and community leaders who are out here taking care of what should be taken care of by regulatory agencies. Why is that? And then the what Beth also lifted up was the continuum of the school to prison pipeline. And this is due to the fact of deeming individuals, specifically children of color and low income children, are considered reckless or are not turning up for school, when at the end of the day, if they have upper respiratory issues and say they don't have access to a vehicle, a reliable vehicle to get to and from school and at home, right? The list goes on. And if you're talking about this starting off in your placenta, then you never even had a chance.
Yeah, not to cut you off, but it's just the sequelae. So it starts even before we're born. And then these same children that are exposed to these toxins and they have issues with brain development. So then they're deemed behavior disorders, and it leads to issues like the prison to pipeline, all starting from what you were exposed to as a fetus.
Right. And so it's up to our communities to do better. Go ahead, Beth. Go ahead.
No, and something that we haven't talked about is like most of the things we talked about is like data driven. Like we can see it, we can feel it, like you can see it in the biology with the mom. But like stuff that is not documented as much is the mental health around it as well.
Go ahead.
And so that's something that's really starting to come up in our work around air pollution, and just the idea that you can't go outside and play because it doesn't smell good. You got to put, you can smell things that just doesn't feel right. Or you have asthma, you don't want to go out and play. You don't have green space, disinvestment. I could go on about water, of course, but it's just in general, like mental health is that not as easily documented data of the effects of these environmental concerns and injustices.
Yeah, I mean, so true. I mean, let's face it, if they say that if you're stressed out, look at a tree, but if you don't have a tree in your area, then that answer ain't it. Or if you can't breathe, that's definitely not it, right? Go outside. Remember they said it all through COVID, go outside. But if COVID is mixed with particulate, what you gonna do? Patricia, remember when last year, was it last year? I think it was last year, right? We were fighting about the water variance, the increase in the heat, in which people were already complaining about smells coming from the Katy Trail. Could you share a little bit about that? Just basic recreational spaces like that are being limited to exactly what you were talking about, Beth.
Yeah. So at power plants, they use so much water. Like at Labadee, it's like 1 million gallons per day of water. And they literally take that from the common good, which is like our waters of the US, and then they use it to cool off their power plants. Well, in the process, they draw in all that water, which has fish and plants and plankton and all kinds of stuff. And that gets sliced and diced up, drawn into the power plant, and then superheated to cool off the power plant, and then it's ejected back into the river. And so I've actually been on the river in the winter when there is ice everywhere else, and you go near that power plant and you can put your hand in the water and it feels like a sauna. But they claim that's not too hot. And then everybody smells the cooked fish and sort of cooked earth, which is really hard to describe, but it's like cooking mud and fish. So and then you have investment in places like the Katy Trail, which I can't remember how much that brings in tourism dollars in recreation for people here in the state, is impacted by that because it's right there on the other side of the river. And we're talking about in Labadee, which is generally not low income, but there are people who are very low income out here who would benefit from some sort of positive development. And we talked about getting a trail on this side of the river. Well, it all runs right past that plant. So they literally suppress the lives of the people who live near these plants. They make them sick. They take away the economic value of their properties. A lot of people out here are multiple generation farm families. I'm the fourth generation of my family here. So you pay this price, and you talk about the mental health, that depresses a whole area. Like, why can't we have better schools? Why can't we have better places to work? But we basically write off these areas. And they're, in different parts of the state, but ours happens to be rural. But they like to go into places where you can't fight back. And people say, well, they built it in 1970 and there was nobody here. And I always say, our families were here.
That's right.
You just didn't care if we were here.
That's right. I think that's a strong piece to remember, right? Both families on either side of the river, or this conversation, has been living in these communities for generations. And yet both sides are being poorly represented by those who fought real hard for their vote, to those who have taken on a role to regulate these corporations to make sure to preserve the health and well-being of not just the people who live here, but also the environment surrounding. And so I just want to, as we close out the discussion here, and I hand it back over to Lindsay to share any questions that have come through before this meeting. I want that to be a sitting with folks, is that this, what we call in the organizing world, we call dog whistles, that has kept us all divided. These are stereotypes or belief systems used to keep people separate. Whereas, what do they say about people who live in rural Missouri? Oh, they are uneducated, poor white people who are racist. That's not the case here. At least that's not what we're hearing. Today, we hear the opposite. Educated folks who just want to maintain the land of their ancestors, right? Who want to keep the farm, keep the land, stay in their community that they grew up in and that their families grew up in for generations. And then you go over to rural, urban areas in St. Louis, where the same conversation is happening, where people believe that people are just looking for a handout. But at the end of the day, people are maintaining homes and families and communities that they grew up in, that their families grew up in, and they've been here for generations. So why is it that the American dream can't be maintained by these individuals? Why is it they get to be ignored? And it's only due to this greed. And so it should no longer be on the backs of Black, brown, or any other community member in Missouri, across any aisle, across any zip code or river divide, because we are all Missourians who are fighting to live in this state, in this place that we call home. And it's up to us to hold our regulatory agencies accountable to do their job and to protect us and our land water, and air surrounding. So Lindsay, I hand it back to you with any of the questions.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the live